Speaking of offensive linemen, former offensive tackle and seventh round pick of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Derwin Gray, not a lot of glowing words for his time in Pittsburgh. He spent his first 2 seasons of his NFL career with the Steelers and said, well, he didn't really learn much from the coaching staff when he was here. Quote, no disrespect to Sean Sarrett in Pittsburgh, but I feel like I didn't learn as much from him. He was an O-line coach, but I feel like I really didn't get the coaching that I deserved and needed to learn the game. I really learned it from my counterparts, guys like Pouncey and Ramon Foster. Those guys really helped me come along. So in a day and age when everybody is mad at Pat Meyer, seems like somebody is mad at one of his former offensive line coaches.
Yeah, and two things here. One, Sean Sarrett was just hired by the Jacksonville Jaguars, so maybe Trevor Lawrence is coming to Pittsburgh. Who knows? And two, I think it points to two things. And you could look at it either way. I don't know what way is the right way to look at it, but I believe there's two ways to look at it. You could look at it and say, Mike Munchak was a piece of Mike Tomlin's offense that was the best. He killed it. And you saw how good he was and what it did to the Pittsburgh Steelers, how much it improved the Pittsburgh Steelers offense when he was around. He leaves. The Steelers are yet to figure it out. They go Sean Sarrett, who did not work out, even after learning under Munchak for 2 years, could not figure it out. You go Adrian Clem, who could not figure it out and then left in the middle of a season. And now you're at Pat Meyer, who, again, right now you can't say is figuring it out. So are the Steelers just in a situation like Ben Roethlisberger where finding the next Mike Munchak is more difficult than we all think it is? Or is Mike Tomlin just this bad at hiring coordinators and assistant coaches? I think it could be looked at one of two ways, but I do think either way is like, no, this is very revealing of how bad it is for the Steelers, how hard they've tried to do this and still can't figure it out. I don't know. You lean more on the side of Mike? You lean more on the side of replacing a Hall of Famer potentially is just as tough?
I think it's a little bit of both because Mike Munchak is widely considered as one of the best offensive line coaches in recent memory, not just for the Steelers, but across the entire NFL. At the same time, the level at which the Steelers have failed to replace him feels like you cannot discount their role in this at all. Like Pat Meyer, I think, is getting a lot of backlash for the performance of the offensive line this past year. And I think some of that was out of his control. But still, when you look at the overarching story since Munchak left, the Steelers have tried and failed. And like you mentioned, Pat Meyer's dancing on his last leg right now. Yeah. And I understand that there's excuses, there's reasons behind that are out of his control, but next year's put up or shut up. And if he doesn't succeed next year and all these other things do go in his favor, like the team is healthy, Broderick's playing on the left side, all these things that we continuously talk about with the offensive line, if the things go in the way that all it is what they can control and they still fail, then you have to look at the Steelers and say, at what point, again, does it lead back to the head coach and saying that now he is 0 for 3 on offensive line coaches and he is clearly 0 for whatever on offensive coordinators? So I think that you look at this and you look at that side of the ball specifically, and it feels like it's a major blind spot for Mike Tomlin, not just in the talent that you're bringing in on the field, but in the guys you're bringing in to coach that talent.
I agree. And I honestly, I'm sitting here listening to you, and in my head, I'm trying to figure out, how do you fix it? How do you go about fixing it? I think that's the biggest question is, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, what do you do moving forward to say, we won't strike out on coaches anymore? Do you remove it from Mike Tomlin? Do you make him a significantly smaller piece to finding his coaching staff, which is like any coach in the NFL finds their coaching staff? That is what they do. Mike Tomlin is just terrible at it. He's never been good at it. And there's been pieces, don't get me wrong. There's been Eddie Faulkner, who I think is a great running backs coach. I liked Grady Brown, but I think Gerald Alexander is just as good of a move. To be totally honest, Denzel Martin might be leaving this offseason, and I was a big fan of Denzel Martin and what he did for guys like Nick Herbig and Jeremiah Moon, who those are two guys that, yeah, super talented maybe at points in their career, should not be this successful in the NFL at various levels, but they should not be this successful in the NFL. I think he's made some promising ones in Tom Arth and Zach Azani, but I think he's striking out, and I don't know how you fix it. Like, do you remove him more from the equation? Do you add somebody else into the equation to try to narrow it out? And at that point, who are you adding? Arthur Smith? Are you adding more Omar Khan? Are you bringing in Andy Weidel, who probably has some say in the matter, but probably not a ton? But do you bring him in and say, look, dude, I've worked for Super Bowl winning teams. Like, maybe I should help out in this situation. I don't know. Do you got thoughts on how the Pittsburgh Steelers possibly solve an issue that goes back years at this point?
It's hard to imagine you solve it without changing what's at the top, because we've talked
Yeah.
ad nauseum about how much power that Mike Tomlin has in that building, and he's not going to relinquish it at this point of his career. Why would he? I understand that the results haven't followed, but he's not going to look at himself and say, you know what? It's because I can't hire coordinators. No, he's going to say it's because of something that happened in this season. It's because of our failures in a couple of weeks span that kind of ruined our entire year. He's not going to look at it as an organizational or a systematic thing. I think that until he's gone, which again, probably not going to happen anytime soon, there's not going to be significant changes in the way they operate off the field.
Yeah, I agree. I don't know. I think it's a revolving door of what is happening for the Steelers, and maybe like the word purgatory gets tossed out so much with the Steelers these days. It's just, I think it's too much. I think we've overused the word. There are certain instances, like I think you could get out of the playoff thing. I think you could figure that out. I think it might take some time, but I think you could figure that out. I think you could get out of the coordinator thing because coordinators are easier to find. As crazy as that sounds, easier to find, and your chances of it being successful are a little bit higher. I think you could figure out the quarterback thing because you have a guy named Justin Fields that might be a lottery ticket. There are some things that purgatory is the right word. Coaching hires seems to be one. Wild that it is. And I'm sure at some point, they might figure it out, but if they don't, I think it takes drastic measures before they do. Like you're really hitting that next level of, okay, backs against the wall a little bit harder here. Where do we go from here? I think that's where we're at.
I mean, is that drastic measures just a losing season? Like, is that
I think it's
where
close
we're at from
yeah.
that being the big change? The wake up moment is, hey, well, you went 8-9 one year, and now Tomlin's saying, oh, well, now we need to change.
Yeah.
If that's the case, how can you not see that with one better game and then getting embarrassed in the playoffs year after year? I mean,
look, I think
it's a question that we can ask over and over again, but I
Yeah.
think that's where the line might end up being.
I agree. I think that might be where the line is. I also think that every year that the Steelers get embarrassed in the playoffs, in the first round of the playoffs, adds to the pressure from Rooney. Like every year he's going to get a little bit more pissed off, and every year that pissed off is going to just stretch because it always fades. Time heals all wounds, and in Art Rooney, that window is like 2.5 weeks of like, all right, I'm super pissed. All right, we're into the offseason. Things are fine. No big deal. I think every year that happens, that gets wider, and eventually it leads to a shocking change early to kick things off. And that's when the door opens. So we'll see.